there! Today we're going to check out this naughty boy, because this is a very interesting fountain pen. It's a Conway Stewart Marlboro, so this is an expensive pen, but it doesn't really want to write. And if you do make it right, at some point it just starts to skip and it will run dry. And this is relatively cheap paper, but it's not ultra smooth or anything, nor is it extremely absorbent, so it should be no problem for the pen to write on this surface. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I think that what this pen suffers from, let me just put that white thing back so that you have a somewhat neutral background. Now this is a little hard to do, but I'm just going to hold out my loop. I'm going to put it in front of the camera. I'm going to try and show you the nib, so there's a little bit of fiddling. Now you can see that's the feed, and when I move this back in view, I'm looking at the bit where it writes. You see there's a minor tine misalignment, but I'm not really worried about that because it seems smooth enough. What I am worried about though is something that looks a bit like baby's bottoms. The pen seems to be a little bit, the nib seems to be a little bit too curved, and then you can have issues with the pen starting up. So what I have here, zoom out a bit, sorry. What I have here is a pack of micro mesh pads with a little chart that shows you how fine the grit is of the mesh. And I got that from andersonpens.net, so if you want to buy it, then that's where you can get it. Now a lot of people I think would start with not too coarse a grit to try and smooth out this nib a bit. So remember what we have. We have a nib that is a bit like that. So you see this little opening right there, and if you put that to the paper, it's not really, the tines are not really touching the paper where they should, and if you apply some pressure, they do so much better. So we're going to try and get rid of that curvature. Now I am starting with relatively coarse grit because the baby's bottom seems relatively pronounced on this pen, so it's best to use this stuff wet, and it doesn't have to be dripping, just make it a little wet. And this is 1500 grit, and that's a pretty coarse grit, so I'm not going to use this for too long, as I don't want to grind away the entire nib. This is a very nice nib, so it would be a pity if I couldn't make it right. Now as you can see, I'm going to check the result. That is key. If you're doing something like this, check the result very often. The more you check it, the better it is. I'm going to make a few more passes here. Check it again. Yes, I like what I'm seeing. I'm getting rid of a little bit of the tipping material, which is exactly what I want to do. Sorry about the annoying scraping noise. I know that really gets on some people's nerves, but this is the only way to do this. And I'm also sorry I'm not showing you the result all the time, but it's a little hard to do that with this camera. So trust me, what I'm looking for is the tipping material to get rid of that roundness and to get a little straighter. This is an italic fine nib, which means that it has a relatively small sweet spot. Also something to bear in mind. Yeah, we're definitely getting somewhere now. Okay. There we go. Yes, I'm going to take my final passes here. Making sure to hit everything, every spot on the nib. Just going to wipe it down a bit. Yes, I like what that looks like. Now what I'm doing is I'm just drying off my micro mesh, and I'm going to move on to the next grit. That will be 1800. What I'm going to do now that I have in my mind removed the baby's bottom, spread that water out a little bit, is polish the nib again, because I've made it coarser by removing some of that tipping. What I like to do is make some figures 8, and you should hold the nib the way you write, because that's how it's going to touch the paper, that's how you want it to touch the micro mesh. So some figures 8, and then infinity signs. I've always liked the infinity sign. And gently rotate the nib so that you're really hitting all the spots on the nib. And then check your result again. I would say that is coming along nicely. You will need some good polishing. So you just move through the grits. Now, in principle, if you are not sure what grits to get, of course you can always get the finest grit. I would say that 12,000 grit, and bear in mind that the higher the number, the finer the grit, so the smoother, less abrasive it is. 12,000 grit is really good for smoothing nibs. However, if you want some more severe work, I mean, in principle, with 12,000 grit, you could turn a fine nib into an metallic. It's going to take you about a year of grinding, but you could do it. So it is a relatively versatile grit, but if you want something that is more pronounced, a stronger effect, and you want to grind nibs, for example, then I would say that a coarser grit, maybe 3600 or 4000 would help, and the one I started out using, as I said, was 1500, which is definitely coarse. Okay, I'm checking the result. Things are looking relatively well, I'd say. So we go on to the next grit, and that would be this tan pad, which is 3200 grit. You see that I'm using water. Water is a good lubricant, and if you use something like that, it's going to extend the life of your pads, which is always a good thing, because that means you can use them longer. It's the same as with honing a knife. Often a wetting stone will require some type of oil to work best. Careful not to apply too much pressure. You don't want to end up with a nib that's ground completely down to the bone. I'm going to move on to my next pad. This would be 3600 grit, sorry. And there we go with our figures 8. Okay. Teal, 4000 grit. And as you can see, I don't really douse the whole thing in water. You really don't need much. The nib you're working on is a very small surface, so I would say a drop of water is really all you need. It's always best to do this with the pen inked up. That way the ink serves as additional lubricant. and also it allows you to test out the effect of your smoothing regularly. I haven't been doing that. The reason is that the nib is a bit too coarse now, and I'm getting it smoother and smoother. If you would be just smoothing without actually grinding, I would definitely test it more often. Okay, I'm gonna use the next pad, purple 6000 grit. And you can probably hear that the noise level of the sound the nib makes on the paper is dropping because the grit of the micro mesh is smoother and smoother. There we go. Okay, this is the penultimate pad. This is Royal Blue 8000 grit. Very soft, and right now this feels very smoothly, almost no resistance. Very different from the rust colored 1500 grit micro mesh I started out with. Alright, this is getting a bit disgusting, so I'm going to move on to the next one with my university's logo on it even. Alright, gray. This is the finest grit, 12,000, so this is what I would recommend for regular nib smoothing. This is very pleasant to use. Right now I don't feel any resistance. Very nice sensation to put the nib to this. You don't want to over polish the nib, you don't want to under polish it, so okay, I'm just flicking it a little bit to get the water out. There we go, nice drops of ink, that looks good. Let's check out the result. I like the looks. Now here's always the very scary moment of truth. And writes. And as you can see, it no longer runs dry, which happened in about one line of writing, and the second line was dry earlier. And I'm using the same spot I used earlier just to show you that it's not that there was grease on the paper or anything like it. So now I know this is a somewhat flexy nib. I'm going to adjust the writing angle so as not to damage the nib. I can flex it a bit. It writes, and that's it. And of course now I have exerted the feed a little bit, but as you can see it starts up again. So there you have it, how to remove baby's bottoms on a nib with SbRebrown. Guys, I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you later. Bye!